Okay, folks, we'd like to get started. In general, this is the regular Foxborough Democratic Town Committee meeting, but we thought it was more than appropriate, given the fact that we have a special election coming up, to give the two Democratic candidates an opportunity to address local Democrats. And so that's part of what's a main part of what our agenda is tonight. I want to recognize that we have two state committee members present other than myself, and that's Jackie Curtis from Mansfield and Claire Naughton from Foxborough. And we also have two, and if I miss anyone, speak up, two town committee chairs, Bill Buckley from Walpole and Rick Wood from Rehoboth. And so we will turn immediately to having our candidates come and address us. The format is pretty informal. I'd just like to have each of the candidates address the group in turn, and then open it up to questions to both candidates, and if appropriate, probably offer the opportunity to each candidate to answer each of the questions. Unless it's your hat size or something like that, there might be some variation. Okay. So I would like, in deference to his residency here in Foxborough, and also a past member of the Board of Selectmen here in town, I'd like to call on Paul Feeney to come up and be the first speaker. Paul.
All right. So good evening, everybody. My name is Paul Feeney. I know many of you. For those that I don't, I am a resident here in Foxborough with my wife Laura, who's here tonight, down on North Street. I've been here since 2004. Grew up in the city of Boston in the Jamaica Plain neighborhood. Married a West Roxbury girl, and we came further south. Wonderful community. I'm blessed to have been able to serve as a selectman in this community. Look, I got to be candid with you. I didn't know. I've been on a ballot 3 times. Never knew if I was going to run for elected office again. But my experiences, especially in the last couple of years, have driven me to an opportunity, not just for myself, which is way down the list, but I think for this district. It's important we keep this district in Democratic hands, because I think that we have the right values, the right ideals, and the right answers for the situations that we're in nowadays, especially with an administration that's going after people, that's attacking people. I think Democrats lift people up. We give people hope, and that's what I've tried to do my entire life. I haven't been perfect. I've certainly learned a lot over the years. But I think not only with my experience, but my experiences, that's what lends itself to a campaign like this, in a district like this. In a blue-collar community like Foxborough and the 8 other cities and towns throughout this district, these are salt-of-the-earth people, middle-class families that deserve a voice. That's why I'm running for this seat. Briefly about myself, I'm a 20-year member of the IBEW Local 2222, which for those that don't know the vernacular, it's the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. I've been a telephone worker in the private sector for 20 years, where I started in 1997 driving a truck across Massachusetts delivering mail, equipment, and tools. Wasn't able to go to college right out of high school. Came from a background where my family wasn't able to help out financially. Had a difficult conversation with my dad the summer of my senior year after I graduated from Don Bosco, where my parents in financial difficulty said, look kid, you gotta go into the workforce, and that's what I did. I entered the workforce, but then I started looking at how I could give back. How can I fight for people? How can I fight for not only my coworkers, but for consumers and people throughout the Commonwealth, and I did that. I've been the legislative director of my local now since 2009, when my mentor, who did that for so many years, passed away, unfortunately early in life. But I've done that for a few reasons. Number one, because I see what the value is of having these middle-class benefits that weren't given to us by a corporation, but something that we fought for. I've been blessed. There's no 2 ways about it. I didn't have a typical journey to running for state senate, but I think it's an important one that people recognize based on hard work and standing up for people. I've had the ability over the years since joining the IBW and working for the telephone company to work on different campaigns for people that support working families. And looking in the last couple of years, have been really inspired by one campaign in particular. Just as a little bit of background, after I was on the Board of Selectmen here in Foxborough from 2007 to 2010, again, I never knew if I was going to have the opportunity to put myself on a ballot again. But in 2015, an opportunity arose that really has inspired me. In 2008, I was with Secretary Clinton in her campaign. In that primary, I volunteered for her up in New Hampshire. Thought I was going to be there again, but then Bernie Sanders got into the race. And Bernie's somebody who spoke to me and spoke to my heart. I remembered a time back in 2003 when Senator Sanders stood on the back of a pickup truck in downtown Boston, and he talked about the value of defined benefit pensions and how those pensions and retiree benefits were going the way of the blacksmith, and how to truly lift people up and to protect our middle class, we had to fight for those benefits. We had to fight for equality. And I harkened back to that when Bernie got into the race and was, I guess, lucky enough that the campaign asked me to serve as his state director in Massachusetts for the primary. And then after the Super Tuesday primary in Massachusetts, I was relocated down to Connecticut where I worked on that. Summer came, thought that the primary was over, I was going to settle down a little bit, and I ended up being on strike for 7 weeks. Again, fighting for those same benefits that my dad fought for years before that. Fighting for that same health care that is so important to people throughout this district, my coworkers and these families. At the end of the summer, I was asked to serve on the Rules and Credentials Committee of the Democratic National Convention. It was at the Rules Committee of that convention where I gave a little bit of a speech based on that unity commission that we were creating, about how to become better as a party. Understanding that it wasn't just about building party unity, but that it was really about sending a message to the rest of the country. It was about connecting values with working people throughout this country. So I gave that speech and was asked 2 nights later if I could do that same sort of thing on the floor of the convention. Not only to second the nomination of Senator Bernie Sanders for the presidency, but to give a bridge speech so that we could unify as Democrats to send a message to people throughout the country that our cause was the right one, that we would fight for their values, that we would fight for those ideals that we hold important to us and to working families throughout the country. So I did that, went to work after that for the Democratic nominee for president, volunteering as much as I could, going to job sites, going to workplaces to talk to workers about how important it is to align ourselves with those values. This opportunity arose this spring, I think just before Easter weekend. Laura and I had a discussion about it, figured what Wayne Gretzky, I think, said, you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. And although it certainly was a surprise to many of us, I thought the time was too important. I wake up angry and scared every single day, like a lot of people throughout this country in this district. And I think it's important for a state senator in this district to fight for values like health care for all. To fight for people when the Trump administration is trying to tear apart the ACA, to do what we can as a Commonwealth to protect those benefits for people, to make sure that health care is a right and not just a privilege, to make sure that we're not only fighting for accessibility to health care, but for affordability. Those are the values I want to fight for. The opiate crisis, which I've seen firsthand. One of my dear friends just up the road in this district in Norton had to bury a 22-year-old son. And it was the worst wake I've ever had to go to because it's an avoidable situation. But when we have a governor that talks about being the governor that's going to fix the opiate crisis, and then proposes 9C cuts to the budgets that are going to affect those frontline workers that work on that every single day, that's unconscionable to me. We have to make sure that we're not only fully funding those programs, that we're empowering the workers that help people that are not only addicted, but that are at risk of addiction. And we also have to make sure that we're mandating insurance coverage so that people can seek that help and can afford that help. Education is a major priority of mine. My wife's an early childhood educator with a family child care in our own home. I've seen what it means to empower educators to run their own classrooms, to not teach to a test, to get rid of the punitive high-stakes testing that we see in these schools nowadays, a bureaucratic system that's set up as a punitive way not only to evaluate and punish teachers, but school systems to remove resources. We have to end that. As Democrats, I think we stand up for those values, and I think people throughout this district, whether they're Democrats or independent, do as well. Those are a couple of things that are important to me. Jobs, obviously, being a 20-year trade unionist, I want to make sure that we're investing in jobs for the new economy, We've seen a shift to the gig economy where people are working harder, they're making less. We need to invest in things like the green economy, one of the fastest growing sectors of Massachusetts, to fight for photovoltaic power and wind power, geothermal energy. Those types of things, that's the future of the Commonwealth. We can put people to work in those industries, but we gotta train them. We gotta make sure that they're getting the education that they need in schools so that they can enter those programs, and we need to invest in them so that we can grow those jobs, especially here in the Bristol-Norfolk district. As a selectman here in Foxborough, I was always a proponent of Route 1 development, not just in retail and hotels, which we see up there now, which I fully support, but in using some of that land up there to spur additional economic development in the life sciences, to do what they call cluster building, to make sure that we're doing everything we can to not only cite neighborhood appropriate development in our communities, but that we're increasing jobs while we're at it. So those are kind of a few of the things that are important to me. Hopefully I get to earn your support, those that are still open-minded in this race. If I can earn your support over the next couple of months, I'd love the opportunity to do that. I'm gonna work hard at earning the job, I'm gonna work hard at doing the job. But one thing you'll get to know about me, and those who saw me serve as selectman at Foxborough, know that I wear my heart on my sleeve. There is no question about who I am. I'm an unabashed supporter of the values and ideals that I think we hold important as Democrats. And that's how I'll run, that's how I'll serve. So I'd love to take any questions, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you. Sure.
Thank you very much, Bob. Next, I'd like to invite Paul Phillips to come up. Paul hails from the town of Sharon.
Ted.
Why do I always do that? I have a close friend named Paul Phillips. I apologize. I've done that to you before. Ted Phillips. Yeah, Paul won't be on the ballot. Ted will. Here we have Ted Phillips from the town of Sharon, who actually heads up Representative Luke Kafka's office at the State House. And he still wants to be on the ballot and be elected, even though it's not Paul. So Ted, before I say anything else wrong, please take the podium.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since my uncle Paul Phillips would be very, very surprised if he heard his name was on the ballot for State Senate. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for the introduction. Good evening, everybody. My name is Ted Phillips. As Dennis said, I am the Chief of Staff to State Representative Luke Kafka. I am one of the Democrats who is seeking the Democratic nomination for State Senate for the Bristol and Norfolk. I'm a lifelong resident of Sharon. I live over there with my wife Bridget, who is here with me tonight, and my dog Lincoln. I'm a graduate of Sharon High, class of 2001. From there I went to the University of Massachusetts, where I got a degree in political science. And I got my master's in Suffolk University while I was working up at the State House. I've worked at the State House for the last 11 years. I started off in the State Senate, working a year for State Senator Steve Brewer from Central Massachusetts before switching over to my home district in the House of Representatives to work for Luke Kafka. And then as he changed positions, my title evolved over the years from legislative aide to committee director of the House Committee on Steering Policy and Scheduling to staff director now as he is division leader. While I was serving in the State House, I've also been involved in my local community. I've spent 10 years on the Sharon Finance Committee. I've also been a member of the Sharon 250th Anniversary Committee, which we had in 2015, a very successful celebration. If you'll allow me a point of personal privilege, Mr. Chairman, I'll also say on the note of celebration, I want to express my congratulations to everybody in here or watching at home who participated in Founders Day. It was a wonderful celebration this weekend. Fantastic job. From the parade to the fair to the fireworks, everything went off beautifully. And so I think people in Foxborough have a lot to be proud of there. I was also a member of the Master Plan Steering Committee. I am a member of the Master Plan Steering Committee in Sharon and have done a stint on our Capital Outlay Committee as well. So I tell you that because I think that highlights the fact that I am very familiar with the relationship between state and local government and can be an effective advocate for the cities and towns of the Bristol and Norfolk up on Beacon Hill. For the last 10 years, working with Lou, I've also worked closely with the man who we hope to succeed, Senator Jim Timilty, on issues of importance for the Bristol and Norfolk, whether it be local issues, working for the towns of Walpole and Mansfield, where there was overlap in the districts, projects like getting funds for prison mitigation in Walpole, taking control of certain parcels of land from the Department of Corrections in order to turn them into recreation fields. I've also had the privilege of being a part of some really great legislation that we got passed up on Beacon Hill. I was very proud to work on bills that ensured coverage for people who are suffering from cleft palate and cleft lip. We ensured that everybody under 18 who had that, who's affected with that, would have health insurance coverage, or health insurance had to cover it in Massachusetts, resolving the issue of a major political football between the health insurance and the dental insurance industries. We did a bill allowing for access to restrooms for patients who suffer from Crohn's and colitis. We've cracked down on animal abuse in Massachusetts. I was very proud to be part of the team that got the PAWS Act done, which increased penalties for animal cruelty, specifically cracking down on animal fighting. Most recently, I was very proud to play a part of the bill which requires the Registry of Motor Vehicles to notify police when people who have had their license suspended in their communities. The registry is required to now notify municipal police if there's been a license suspension in their communities. Unfortunately, in Sharon, we had a tragedy a few years back where someone who was operating on a suspended license went off the road and took the life of a young woman. And so, working with the family, we were able to make that change so that police officers who may be more familiar with the residents in their community would be able to be on the lookout for these people in case their licenses were suspended. Working on things like the budget, I was able to help with securing funding for early intervention programs in the Commonwealth. And the reason I tell you all of this is because in building this track record of accomplishment up on Beacon Hill, one of the things that I've been able to do is build relationships. Relationships with other legislators, with advocates, with people surrounding the legislative process that I think give me a leg up that allow me to be a plug-and-play senator. I will be able to hit the ground running on day one, and I will be able to capitalize on those relationships to put those relationships to work for the residents of the Bristol and Norfolk. So with that, there are three priorities that I've highlighted for my candidacy. Education is one of them. We are working on an outdated formula that hasn't really been overhauled since 1992. We need to do a lot more in order to bring dollars back to our school districts. We also need to re-examine the relationship that charter schools play in our education system. I don't think that they're achieving what they were originally designed to do. And I think we need to get rid of high-stakes testing. I don't feel that it works. My father was a teacher for 41 years, and I would hear about this at the dinner table all the time, about having to teach the test and having to spend more time filling out reports than compiling lesson plans. And that's not the way it should be for our teachers. As Paul mentioned, the opioid crisis, we still haven't bent the curve back on it. Last year, almost 2,000 people in Massachusetts, I think the number was 1976 residents that we know of lost their lives in the battle with addiction. And the numbers have not started going down yet. So we need to continually, as a legislature, continually revisit this topic with the experts. We made some good strides a few years ago in starting some of the initiatives to curb the crisis, but we need to be going back on either a quarterly or a semi-annual basis, sitting down with the frontline experts, the police, the fire, the healthcare workers, figuring out what works, figuring out what doesn't work, and then redirecting the resources accordingly. And finally, transportation. I live on the Providence line in Sharon. We have a lot of problems with the MBTA. Trains often show up late, and sometimes cars short. I hear from my neighbors all the time that when trains show up short, people cram into the cars, and then the conductors can't get down the aisles in order to collect the fares, and they need the fares in order to keep the system financially viable. So I am opposed to any MBTA expansion in Foxborough and anywhere else until the MBTA can get its fiscal house together, can get its house together and run the system in a way that is efficient and proven for an extended period of time. I think we really need to, the team needs to get their house in order before proposing all these different projects. There's a project expansion on the South Coast Rail to Gillette Stadium and other places that I just don't think make sense. So with that, those are the three major issues for me. Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it back to you, and maybe we can do some questions.
All right, questions? Let's start right back there. Charles?
Good evening, candidates. My question is on the state pension. If there are any investments in fossil fuel companies, what is your position on de-investing in those fossil fuel companies? And would you introduce legislation to accomplish that goal?
Do you want to take that one first?
Mr. Chairman, is there an order you want to go in, or does it matter?
No, you guys.
Okay, sure.
Maybe you want to just take turns between the two of you?
Okay.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you, Charles. It's a great question. I think we need to do as much as we can as a Commonwealth to make our society a better place, and I think if it means in de-investing in dirty energy, then we should do that. Absolutely.
Again, great question. There actually is a bill to divest from fossil fuels up in at the State House right now. I think it is important to divest from fossil fuels. I haven't read the text of the bill, but I think we should be, as Paul said, weaning our way off of dirty energy companies and things like that. As long as we can do that in a way that responsibly steps down from those companies in a way that does not sacrifice the economic returns that the PRIM board is currently seeing. The PRIM system, pension reserves, is a very well-run system, and I wouldn't want to do anything that would compromise their rate of return. But if there's a responsible way to sort of step that down and then step it up in other areas that we know are performing, then I'm all for it.
Yes.
Hi.
Yeah.
I have kind of a weird question because I always find it ethically ambiguous, and I feel like the state doesn't always respond well to it. But given you both mentioned the opioid crisis, and given that the state has this history of kind of letting people vote for something and then pulling it back and not quite getting to it, what are your opinions on the use of both medical and now, I guess, recreational marijuana as a counterpoint or as a tool to counteract the deaths in the opioid crisis? Because some studies say it stems, it limits some senior citizens' prescription drug overdoses and stuff like that, and there's some studies to prove it, and I know there's some ethical and moral questions around it as well, but I'm just wondering what your opinion is on that.
Sure. One of the new techniques that has been proposed is using medical marijuana under the supervision of a doctor as a way to step people down from their addiction. It's a relatively new practice, so I don't know that the data is in, but as long as I'm open to trying anything. Like I said, it's one of those things where people are still dying at an alarming rate. So if it focuses on the harm reduction side. So if we do that, I have no problem with it, being used under supervised. As far as medical and recreational marijuana go, the people voted for it. It's the law, and we should be moving faster to implement the system. There's actually going to be a bill, the recreational marijuana bill that tweaks the ballot question that's coming up in the House on Thursday. Hopefully, they will have that settled by the time either Paul or I heads to Beacon Hill. So.
I agree. Hopefully it's settled by then. One of the things I always struggle with, obviously, when it comes to substance abuse is kind of the messages that we're sending to people, right? I spent a lot of time as a youth football coach in Foxborough, Pop Warner, and in Little League for years, working with children, and I worry about the message that it sends when we legalize drugs, and then tell them at the same time to stay away from certain other drugs. However, when it comes to marijuana, I did vote in favor of allowing medicinal use as well as recreational use. And the reason why I did that is because I think it's important to decriminalize, to make sure that we're not putting people in prison, especially in other areas of this district and across the Commonwealth, where we have the school-to-prison pipeline that a lot of times is aligned with people using marijuana, as crazy as that sounds. So, I thought it was important to make sure that we, that we supported legalization, both recreationally and medicinally. As far as using it to curb opiate addictions, I think there's a lot we need to learn. There's a lot we need to learn. We gotta figure this out. Again, from a message standpoint, we need to make sure we have an honest conversation with our children and those people that are at risk. But at the same time, we need to do everything we can to make sure that we're offering treatment, that people know where to get treatment, that it's affordable and it's accessible. I will say on the marijuana piece that I think we're kind of at a crossroads now where currently the regulation of the new law, the system is going to be set up through the Treasurer's Office. There's been some talk in Beacon Hill whether or not they're going to create another commission similar to the Gaming Commission. I think it's important that we keep it in the Treasurer's Office, you know, similar to the Alcoholic Beverage Control Board, which he currently oversees. But at the same time that the local communities have say over it. We have the issue here in Foxborough. I know there's other communities throughout the district. We need to make sure that we're citing these in places that don't disadvantage a particular neighborhood, that don't ruin the fabric of a particular neighborhood, but at the same time that we're not being a roadblock and an obstruction to actually instituting the law that people voted for.
Okay. Good question, very timely, of course. Anyone else? Tina?
Yeah, I apologize for being late tonight. I was late because of the commuter rail. Thank you very much. There was a train right before my train coming south lost its engine, whatever. So we had to pick up all those people and make every stop, and so I apologize for being late, because I don't mind, because my husband will tell you I hate to be late. My question to both of you is a rather general one. I am extremely disturbed by what I perceive to be a war on women in the current administration. And I'm speaking at the national level, and I was also extremely disappointed that our governor did not attend the Women's March. And I just want to know what your take is on policies that affect women in particular, women's health, equal pay for equal work, and what you think your vision is for what we can do at the state level to make sure that women have equal access and equal protection under law for health care, for jobs, for compensation, for everything that men get and nobody thinks twice about it. So I'd like to hear from both of you on that.
Thank you, Tina. I appreciate the question. I was at the Women's March and was incredibly inspired after a day which I was completely terrified the day before on the inauguration of our president. Look, I think the first thing we need to do in that, and you're 100% right in the way you framed it and referenced it, first thing we need to do is we have to have an open and honest conversation that it actually exists. There's a state rep in this district who has made public statements before that doesn't actually exist, that women aren't at a disadvantage, that nobody's going after them, that there isn't a war on women. However we frame it, we need to acknowledge the fact that women make less on the dollar than men do, that it cuts across every sector and industry and part of this country, that Foxborough and the Bristol Norfolk are not immune to it, that we're sending a message to young women especially, that they're not equal to men or that they're not equal to boys in their own classroom. We need to do everything we can to address that. As far as the attack on women's health care, I'm fully supportive of a women's right to choose, including increasing it, dropping the age, because understanding that I come from a frame of reference where my family, I could always have conversations with my parents. That doesn't exist everywhere throughout the Commonwealth. So we need to do what we can to make sure that we're not only empowering women in our own communities, but really young women throughout the state. I celebrated the passage of the Lilly Ledbetter Act, which I've been supportive of my entire career as somebody who's been active in the workers' rights movements. You know, that was important to me, but we need to do more. We need to do more, and as a state senator, I'm fully on board for sponsoring legislation, championing legislation, and passing legislation that does everything we can, not only protect women, but to send a message to young women that those times are over and fully empower them going forward.
You're not going to find a lot of daylight between us on this. As someone who was also at the Women's March, I mean, it's been incredibly inspiring to see actually a large number of women who have decided now, in the wake of November, to get off the sidelines and get involved. Most of the people, I'm a member of the Sharon Democratic Town Committee, we've seen a huge surge in interest and membership, and most of that is coming from women. And I think that you know, as Paul said, we're exactly the same on the policies which he just espoused. I would also suggest that also the FMLA, the Pregnancy Workers Fairness Act, things like that are all legislative steps that we can and will take, you know, to make sure that women feel comfortable and confident. I think that there is also something to symbolism. We need to be highlighting success stories where women are getting involved in running for offices, whether it be, you know, first-time office seekers or people who have been champions. We need to do a better job up on Beacon Hill, sending that, highlighting those examples and sending that message out so that women can see, young girls and women can see that and aspire to that. People like Maura Healy, are fantastic role models that we need to get out even more amongst our communities so that they can inspire and that they can lead. Sure.
Yeah, Rick?
So just kind of springboarding from that, on the topic of racial equity, specifically within our district, is there an existing piece of legislation that you think you would support specifically towards that, or an issue that maybe is achievable, not pie in the sky idea?
Well, I think we're about to make some very good strides on criminal justice reform. That's sort of been on the front burner for a while. There was a commission that came up with recommendations, and I know that the House and the Senate are chugging along. We're hoping before the summer recess that we get a significant piece of legislation. Not knowing everything that's going to be in it, it's very difficult to say whether or not I would support it, but I think that bill has the opportunity to address some of the racial disparities that we're seeing, particularly in criminal sentencing. Nonviolent drug offenders, in particular, are places where we can be making significant strides in sentencing reform that I think will go a long way here in Massachusetts. So that would be the one piece of legislation I can think of off the top of my head that I would look forward to working on and sinking my teeth into.
Thank you, Rick. I appreciate the question, and I think Ted's right. We need to do everything we can to make sure that especially young minority folks throughout this district understand that they're not just being left aside, that we're not going to continue the school-to-prison pipeline, unfair sentencing, and it's important for us to address criminal justice reform. But it's also important to understand that the issues that minorities are facing throughout the Bristol Norfolk District and throughout the state aren't just centered around criminal justice, that there's a major educational component to this, that we have cities and towns throughout the state that are made up of a majority of minority people where they're completely underfunded at a higher rate than communities like Foxborough, right? We need to do everything we can to address that education funding to make sure that as the commission that was set up a couple of years ago came out and said we could be underfunding up to $1 to $2 billion per year. A lot of that happens in cities and towns that are made up of majority of minority students. That's unconscionable to me. It's unconscionable that a city like Attleboro has to lay off teachers every year, and that people, students are left by the wayside. So the criminal justice piece is very important. I agree with Ted, we need to address that, but understanding as well that there's a matter of respect, there's a matter of symbolism like we just talked about with women. We need to make sure that young minority men and women throughout this district and throughout the state understand that there's a place for them, that they can run for office. You have two white Catholic males, I believe,
Yep,
right? Running for state senate in the Democratic district here. We got to do a better job. I was proud to serve as the co-chair of the Democratic Platform Committee recently, and this is one of the things that we talked about, crisscrossing the state over the last couple of months. And we heard from people throughout this district and throughout the state on a lot of the issues that affect minority students. We have to do a better job, especially where we have a president and administration that's going after people based on where they're from, whether their documented immigrant status, and the color of their skin. We got to do a better job in fighting for those people, and I certainly think we can do that in the state senate here in Massachusetts.
Thank you.
Karen?
Thank you. I was wondering, based on what's happening in Congress with healthcare and the attempts to dismantle the Affordable Care Act and what's going on in the Senate and what might happen, I was wondering what you think that the state of Massachusetts can do. Obviously, there's a potential to lose a lot of federal funding, but I was wondering what you both think that the state of Massachusetts can do to protect our mass health system and the people that are currently on that depend on that health.
So I think Massachusetts, we've led the way in certain respects over the years when it comes to healthcare. I was in the building in the State House in 2005, serving as Senator Timothy's chief of staff when we had these discussions, and they were passing the Romney Care version of the ACA, which remember was kind of a Heritage Foundation plan from years before. And I think it went a long way to at least putting people on the healthcare rolls. So taking that uninsured compensation pool, that uninsured pool, and shrinking it and putting people, in insurance coverage. The problem is we never addressed the affordability piece of that, right? I had heard one congressman at one point said, it's like we paid the ransom and then we let the insurance companies keep the hostages. And I think that's an important piece to this. We never fixed the foundation of this. Now, I happen to think that single payer is achievable, and it's the way that we should address this problem. I think it's way overdue. It's bold and it's aspirational, and it may have to be done incrementally, but I don't think we should lose that and kind of have this paralysis by analysis. Now's the time. Now's the time when we address healthcare, especially with the dismantling of the ACA, to say with millions of people coming off the healthcare rolls in this country, in this district, and across the state, we have to do everything we can to make sure that they have access. Healthcare to me has always been a right, not a privilege, and I think the one way we can accomplish that, to make sure that everybody has that right from the time they're born in this country, is to pass single-payer healthcare. And if Massachusetts has to lead the way, then I'll be a senator that supports that.
So we don't know right now what's coming down the pike from the federal government, and that's sort of the big problem, is that we are sitting here in Massachusetts in a defensive crouch, waiting to see what the federal government does before we can react and respond. Governor Baker has made it clear that should the ACA go away as it currently exists, that we are going to head back to Romney Care with some tweaks. I think that is the right intention, that we have to make sure that if the ACA comes off the books, if the federal government insists on removing it instead of strengthening it, then we have an obligation to make sure first that everyone remains covered in Massachusetts, that the mandate stays in place, and that we take care of our residents. There are a lot of things that we can do here in Massachusetts surrounding the Price Provider Commission, the Health Policy Commission. They're working on solutions right now to provide recommendations for ways that we can bring the cost of prescription drugs down, to start nibbling around the edges in terms of bringing the costs as it currently goes down, or the costs as the system currently exists down. I'm a little bit skeptical of single payer working on a state-by-state basis. I think it's something that we need to move towards nationally. The problems, as I see it, was that in 2014, Vermont tried. They spent 4 years building a single-payer healthcare system. Then they got it to the governor's desk. They scored it. And then the Democratic governor of Vermont, Peter Shumlin, had to walk away from it because it was not economically viable for Vermont. And Vermont is a much smaller system and should have been a much easier system to switch over to single-payer healthcare. California is doing the same thing. There was an article in the New York Times a couple weeks ago that a representative in California had filed the bill, and they were moving towards contemplating a single-payer healthcare system. But unfortunately, Jerry Brown, whose progressive credentials are beyond question, suggested that he would have trouble signing the bill because it would blow something like a $40 billion hole in the budget. Obviously, Massachusetts is, the economies of scale are very, very different, but in a time where we are struggling to cover our own revenues, I think it's very difficult to see where we would get the revenue to accomplish single payer in an effective way. So I am for single payer at the federal level. I want them to, I fully hope that our Democratic delegation will push very hard to get single payer. And there are even some Republicans now who are saying that with the current state of the ACA, that they'd even be willing to listen. So I think that there's an opportunity for a conversation there at the federal level. I'm a little bit more skeptical based on other states' experiences that we can get single payer done here. So my focus would be to look for some practical reforms once we know what's going to happen at the federal government to bring costs down in Massachusetts based on the Romney Care model that we expect to go back to.
Chairman, if I could just do a quick follow-up to that. And then, one of the things that I think we're kind of stuck in now is looking at what is the federal government going to do. Look, we have a Republican-controlled House, a Republican-controlled Senate, and a Republican president that are going to block every single thing that we want to do as Democrats and as independents to help people. I'm nervous about letting the federal government try and do anything over the next 4 years. And judging by past elections, if we don't get our act together over the next 8 years. I think we need to lead the way, especially for, and I didn't mention this when I initially spoke about it, small businesses. When we talk about what single payer is going to cost, you know, there's a system set in place now that doesn't work for anybody except for the pharmaceutical companies and the for-profit healthcare companies. It's wrong. When we want to help small businesses, like my wife, who at some point would like to expand her business, she's going to be saddled and crippled with healthcare costs that are through the roof to bring on extra employees. So, you know, although I agree with Ted, I'd love to see a national model. I don't think it's going to get done. And I think anybody that's looking at this with reason thinks it can get done. We have to do something about it now. The prices are skyrocketing. We're losing people off the healthcare rolls, and we have to do everything we can in Massachusetts. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Nancy Dulac.
Oh, I wanted to ask both candidates, how do you feel about $15 minimum wage?
Oh, I fully support it. It's just that simple. Yeah, I fully support it. The move to a $15 minimum wage is something that it makes a lot of sense. I think that one of the I was actually reading an article today about Seattle, which is on its way to $15 minimum wage. They just increased to a $12.50 right now, and it's going to be at $15 by, I think, January of 2018. And everybody who had thrown up their hands and said that prices are going to go up, costs are going to go up, everything's going to go up, have been proven incorrect. The minimum wage went up, and prices for services weren't really affected by all. There was a slight uptick in the restaurant and food service industry because it's so labor intensive, but other than that, it was deemed to be quite the success. So I fully think that could happen here, and I support the move to a $15 minimum wage.
Thank you, Nancy, for the question. Again, no difference between Ted and I on this one. I'm fully supportive of $15 minimum wage. I've worked for it. I've testified for it. I've rallied for it. I've made a lot of noise for $15 an hour minimum wage over the years. I think now's the time to do it. Don't believe the hype when they tell you that most people who are making minimum wage are teenagers, you know, working as delivery drivers. They're not. Many of the people that are going to be helped by an increase in the minimum wage are principal earners and their families. Imagine trying to live in a community like Foxborough, Mansfield, Norton, and Walpole on less than $15 an hour. It can't happen. It can't happen. So $15 an hour minimum wage, I'm fully supportive of, and will continue to advocate on behalf of it.
So the chair's going to exercise the privilege of asking his own question now, just for a moment. There are two ballot questions on the 2018 ballot that I am interested in asking you about. One would essentially repeal the rights of transgender citizens to public accommodations that we all enjoy as a matter of course, and they enjoy now unless somehow this is repealed in a referendum. So, and the second one is the millionaire's tax question. And the millionaire's tax, of course, would essentially tax your income over $1 million. Okay, and just to put that in perspective, of course, you'd have to make $25,000 to $30,000 a week in order to reach that the privileged position of paying that tax. So, frankly, I am strongly opposed to the repeal of transgender rights, and I'm strongly in favor of the passage of the so-called millionaire's tax, although I don't like the name because I think it's misleading. And I'd like to know what your individual opinions are on this, number one, and number two, if you are elected, since it won't be until 2018, what will you do specifically, as you can tell, in the district on each of those questions to try to rally people to a position?
Thank you, Dennis. Two great questions, topical questions. As far as the transgender rights, I think we should be doing more for people to understand that we're going to protect them if they're under attack. I do not support the ballot initiative to repeal those rights, and will do everything I can to work against that. Millionaire's tax, otherwise known as the Fair Share Amendment, which is probably a better way to phrase it. Look, people are going to tell you folks as a Democratic Town Committee that in a district like this, you know, the millionaire's tax has no legs. I disagree with that. I think when we look at, once again, we're completely under projections as far as the state budget goes. There's a lot of difficult decisions that need to be made. Transportation infrastructure is crumbling across the state. I know Tina said she took the train. I drive most days in and out of Boston if I have meetings. bridges are falling down, we need to do a better job in layout and fixing some of the roads. In Mansfield, we had a spirited discussion, I think, about the highway system. We need to be able to fix those things. We need to be able to make sure that we're fully funding our education programs. The Fair Share Amendment does that. And the Fair Share Amendment does that without affecting middle-class people in this district, without affecting middle-class and working-class families throughout the state. So now's the time to do that. There's a lot of folks that have made a lot of money in the Commonwealth over the last few years on different things. We need to make sure that we're going after our fair share so that we can address those items and fix those items. We can't be afraid of revenue, but at the same time, I am vehemently opposed raising revenue on the backs of working class families and people like Nancy talked about that are making minimum wage. We need to do it another way, and I think the Fair Share Amendment is the way to do that.
Again, we're going to agree on this. The repeal of the transgender law is something that I was very disappointed to see people come out and try to repeal this. It's a small group of very dedicated opponents who did not get their way on Beacon Hill, and I am fully opposed to repealing it. I know that Attorney General Healy worked very hard to try and keep this off the ballot because she believed it was a civil right. Unfortunately, because it was the protections were in the form of legislation, she felt that she had to certify the question and put it on the ballot because it's simply a repeal of legislation in the technical sense. But we will work very, very hard to make sure that that repeal does not go through. I also support the Fair Share Amendment. Massachusetts does not have a progressive income tax structure. I think that it may actually be worth talking about in the future. It's worth noting that the highest marginal tax rates in Iowa, 8.98%, Arkansas 6.99%, Idaho 7.4%, South Carolina 7.0%. Those are all conservative states, and we are sitting here debating whether or not millionaires should maybe contribute a little bit more. I think that's a no-brainer for me. So when you say what do we do to support it, actually the election calendar sort of works in our favor as advocates on this one because we have the special election in September and October, but then whoever wins is going to have to turn around and start running for re-election in 2018, and we're going to be on the ballot just like these ballot questions. So as we run around from town to town in the Bristol and Norfolk, it will give us an opportunity and a platform to reaffirm our opposition to the first question and our support for the second. So I think that'll work in our favor. We'll have a pretty big microphone to use. I intend to use it, and I'm sure Paul does too.
Thank you. See, someone who hasn't had a chance to speak yet. Bill.
I think like 2 out of 3 chairs asked a question, so what are your feelings about the Chapter 70 Review Commission and the implementation of its findings and how that affects? I see a lot of current and former public school teachers in the room and how that affects the public schools in Bristol and Norfolk District, especially maybe Attleboro.
Yeah. Is this yours or mine? Sorry.
Did everybody hear the question up front? No. Okay, so the question was, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're concerned about the Chapter 70 money, which is the major source of public education funds. And your concern is what's going to happen with that and what would they do with regard to enhancing it?
So I'll take this one. Sure. There was a Foundation Budget Review Commission that issued a number of recommendations. We are sitting on those recommendations on Beacon Hill right now. Senator Sonia Chang Diaz filed a bill to implement some of the recommendations of the committee. Senator Mike Rush also has a bill that is supported by the Mass Teachers Association to do a little bit more than is currently proposed in the Foundation Budget Review. I'm a fan of Mike Rush's bill. I think it goes a little bit further and does a good job achieving some of the objectives that the review came up with. I was very disappointed when Senate President Rosenberg said a couple weeks ago that he was skeptical of taking up any kind of education reform before we see what happens with the Fair Share Amendment. I think that is, I understand why he did that, which is he wants to know what kind of dollars we're projecting to deal with when we tweak the foundation formula. However, I think there's a lot of other things around the formula, sort of low-hanging fruit that we can go after now that will be beneficial immediately and have immediate effect for our teachers and our school systems, our school districts moving forward. So I would, if we can't tackle the whole thing this session, my hope is that we will tackle some of it, and then once we get the results of the Fair Share Amendment, immediately move to tackle the financial piece.
Yeah, I'm with Ted as well on that. For years, I've heard about the Chapter 70 funding and the foundation formula that nobody seems to understand, but we know in a district like this that it doesn't work. I think I was 14, 15 years old the last time it was actually adjusted. That shows you something. I had hair back then, and I was a young guy, and again, I think it's just been too long. We need to make sure that we implement the commission report, especially when it comes to fully funding many of the districts throughout the state. The fact that the foundation formula is so faulty right now that we could be $2 billion short changing our districts is wrong. So we need to do everything we can. Again, hopefully the Fair Share Amendment, as Ted pointed out, will help us address that with some much needed revenues. And then also looking at making sure that we stop the flow of public school money to charter schools. I was a proud supporter of No on 2 last year to make sure that the expansion of charter schools stopped and that we were actually reinvesting in public schools and using charter schools as they were originally intended. So I'm familiar with Senator Chang Diaz's bill, Senator Rush's bill, and I think it's important that we have a senator from this district that supports that legislation.
Okay. Did you have a question?
I can go first.
Okay. Claire?
Okay, it was said tonight that it's very important to keep the Senate district Democratic. And in that vein, let's say one of you doesn't win the primary. Let's just say one of you doesn't win.
Well, that's
Right?
it might happen.
Right, that might happen, right.
Science.
Okay.
Right.
Right. Will you pledge, right here, tonight, on TV, and in front of all of us, to work for the other person? Truly work. Bring your people that you have that are working for you in the primary. And not just show up to hold a sign or something like that once in a while, but will you pledge to work for the other person? Because we all know, we all feel it's really important to have a Democrat here in this Senate district.
Yes, absolutely. It's one of those things, Paul and I have had this conversation. I think that it was actually in our first conversation when we spoke about running for the seat, that no matter what happens on September 20th, we are Democrats and we are coming together because it is too important for the Bristol and Norfolk to have a Democratic senator whose values, who can represent us and represent our values on Beacon Hill. The Republicans have made it clear that they view this seat as a pickup. They think this is a purple district, and they think that they have an opportunity here to get themselves, I think it's the 7th Republican senator. I don't think that's true. I think that's pre-Trump math, and I think that when we work together, I know that we can win this seat and keep it blue. So yes, I absolutely pledge that if I am not the nominee of the Democratic Party for state senate, we'll work very hard, and Paul would have my lists, my data, and everything else to go and make sure that this stays blue.
Yeah, I make that same pledge tonight. Ted and I, as he said, have had that conversation. I think when I was thinking about running, and I reached out to him and called him, and we had that conversation finally, and we said, look, no matter what happens, look, in politics, and we're in a divisive time, right? We need to unify as Democrats. I've learned a lot over the years, right? I've learned a lot. One of the things I know nowadays is that when we come together on stuff, we can absolutely make a difference. But politics can't just be about personality, it's going to be about principles. I've always put principles over personality. Ted and I feel the same way on a lot of the values and ideals that make us Democrats. So it's important that when we finish this primary season, that we're not tearing each other down or being negative or going after people. We got to come together on this, and that means from tonight through this campaign and at the end of this primary season. Ted has my complete pledge to support him if he is the nominee, but he also has my pledge that we're going to run a race based on issues, based on values, based on ideals that I think are important to the people in this district, because I'm not going to play what they're doing nationally or what they're doing in other levels. There's too much at stake. We're going to come together on September 20th. The Democratic Party, I know at a state level, is already planning on sending organizers down here, on investing in the district, and they've asked us both to make sure we come together, and I pledge to do that.
I'm good.
Okay, Charles?
I want to congratulate both of you on that answer to that last question. That was excellent. My question is, I'm afraid that here we are in Massachusetts, particularly in the suburbs between Boston, the Providence, and Worcester, and we're in a housing crisis. The idea of affordable housing, particularly from the perspective of young people, if they don't have a chance right now to buy a house, what the cost of housing is now, and even rental, if they have to come down the first month's, last month for a security deposit, they're closed out of a lot of rentals. So my question is, what are your policy, each of yours, in terms of coming up with truly affordable housing for people in the Commonwealth, and what type of progressive policies and agendas will you work for and fight for in the State House?
I think you said it right. It's truly affordable housing, because too many times we hear the term affordable housing. Have you seen what constitutes affordable housing nowadays? I mean, you know, I make a pretty good salary, and I couldn't move into some of the affordable housing. It's insane what they expect of people, but they do that as a way to get around, you know, certain zoning laws in our community. So when we talk about affordable housing, we do have to make sure that we're actually investing in housing stock where seniors, people with disabilities, low-income folks can actually move into that housing. We don't do enough, I think, in those areas. As far as specific legislation, I'm not aware of any off the top of my head, but you'll have a champion in me to address affordable housing in our communities. Again, I don't come from a lot of means. It was something, you know, I was born to a single mom that was in a project development in Boston. She was given the opportunity to build a life because she had that opportunity, and to make sure that I was better off in the next generation. That means something. That means something to people that want to live in these communities, that want to invest in our communities, that need a place to grow, that have access to education systems in places like Foxborough, and a great educational system. So I would absolutely, I agree with you, we need to address truly affordable housing and make sure that we're not just skirting the laws, that we're not just putting up more McMansions with a development that has a few affordable housing units that people still can't afford to move into. But it's a major issue, and I'm absolutely behind you on that.
So, as I said, I grew up in Sharon, and I was pretty well set that I wanted to stay in Sharon when it came time to settle down. And you know, fortunately, Bridget indulged me on that point. She's from Easton. We had a bit of a border war, but I managed to get her into Sharon. But in order to do that, it took us 8 months of looking for a house before we were finally able to find a foreclosure in Sharon that was priced right, and we were able to do some work on it to get it up to, you know, to livable conditions. And that was just for me to stay in my hometown. We have a major problem with the 40B law in Massachusetts. The 40B law I think it works better for our urban areas than it does for our suburban areas. The goal of affordable housing is, as Paul said, it's paid lip service out here with some of these McMansion developments, because what 40B was designed to do was to create more opportunities for people to live in the communities that they grew up in, for seniors to downsize in the communities that they still live in, or that they wanted to continue living in, excuse me. And right now, it's just being used as a weapon by developers to put a gun to the head of towns and say, we want these favorable zoning conditions, or we are going to, use 40B. We're going to sue you under 40B, and then we're going to put in a development that doesn't fit with the character of your town. So, with a rate of with a success rate at the Housing Appeals Court of 90%, favoring the developer, it's a 90-10 split. A lot of towns, particularly out here in the Bristol and Norfolk, have taken the stance, basically, that rather than try to fight these harmful developments in court, they just say, you know, okay, don't hurt us, let's work something out. And they negotiate something that's a little bit less harmful instead of working together to create more affordable housing as it should be. Like I said, and like Paul said, for our seniors and for people who grew up in the town that want to stay in town. So I do believe that we need to reform our 40B law to reflect those differences, to reflect the fact that it's not working out here in the suburbs, and at the same time preserve what is working in terms of getting more affordable housing, because we just don't have the stock right now. It's terrible. Seniors should be able to age in the communities that they helped build. They should be here, and they should be passing on, you know, the knowledge that they've acquired in playing roles in town government. You know, we have all these people who contribute their time, their talents, their effort, volunteering for the town. Then they retire, they downsize, they maybe go down the Cape. We never hear from them again. We lose the institutional knowledge, and part of that comes back to the housing. It's because when they downsize, they don't have a place to downsize in their own community. So for me, yeah, affordable housing is a very important thing that we need to tackle, because we're just not getting it done right now at a state level, and it's not working for our communities. It's not helping us maintain, you know, the character and the strength, and allowing us to strengthen our communities by bringing in people from urban areas who want to contribute and who would like, you know, perhaps a different setting. So that's my take.
Yes, way in the back.
Hi, you finally said some words that I've been waiting to hear, and you said people with disabilities. We talked about housing. How familiar are you with the Department of Developmental Services and the legislation that is targeting the dismantling of sheltered workshops? Can you speak to that?
Sure. I actually can't speak very well to that bill. When you say how familiar am I with the Department of Developmental Services, working in the legislature as a staff director, my interaction with the department has usually been with residents from our district who are having either an issue or have a specific problem that we would have to iron out. A lot of times for me as a staffer, it would be dealing with people who felt that perhaps their family member or loved one was improperly classified and was deserving of more services, but was unfortunately not receiving them. And so our job would be to make sure that DDS would go back and review the case and hopefully increase the level of priority that the constituent was, in order to get them the services that they needed. So I'm actually not familiar with the bill that you had asked about, but would certainly love to learn more.
Same here. What was that bill again? I just want to make sure I write it
I
down.
apologize, I don't know the name of the bill, I don't have any numbers.
Yeah.
But LifeWorks.
LifeWorks?
Norfolk,
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
You know, a division of ARC is facing requirements that they dismantle their sheltered workshop. And I think it's important for you to educate yourself on this and to understand, to speak to the families and understand the implications for that, for people who cannot work out in the community. And what that means to a working mom who pays the taxes that funds these programs. And if I do not have a full-time program, I can't work a full-time job.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
Can I ask you, I'm
Yeah,
sorry, I
go ahead.
just wanted to clarify. So this reduction that's being talked about, our plan, is this coming from the executive branch? Is this coming from governor's office? So where is that coming
It's
from?
coming from the legislative branch, if I'm
Yes.
not mistaken.
So it's a budget, it's part of a budget move then?
I think it was intended as, it was initiated by people who didn't understand that there are some individuals who can't work out in the community
Yeah.
without the supports and services that a program that LifeWorks offers.
Sure. I think that's one of those, not being familiar with the legislation, it may have been filed with the best of intentions. You know, a lot of times there are some unintended consequences that legislators don't see when they are initially filing the bill, but fortunately that's what some of the legislative process is designed to do is to slow it down enough so that, you know, people who are affected by, you know, the change would be able to come in and testify. So hopefully,
I'd be happy to get you the information and put it forward to both of you. so
if
that
you wouldn't mind,
be
because,
aware
you know, we
of the
should be
issues as well.
very well aware of this, and obviously, I don't think Paul or I would favor cutting services to our most vulnerable residents.
Yeah, I'll definitely look into it, and if you could, drop an email,
I'll get you the information.
paul@votefeeney.com, real easy, and I'd love to look into that. I mean, look, I'll tell you what my experience is on issues like this, and it's a sad state of affairs, because I've worked in the legislature both as a staffer, as a chief of staff to a senator, and then really for years as a legislative advocate for workers. And one of the things that I see up at the State House is elected officials that carry each other's water, and they carry the water of people that come into their office that are lobbyists. People in the disability community don't have a strong enough voice, because, as you said, as a working mom, when are you going to have the time to go in there and advocate for more funding, as opposed to the insurance companies? Right, as opposed to the insurance companies that are in there spending, you know, tens of thousands of dollars every week, every year, every cycle, millions of dollars in lobbying to go in there and lobby for additional funding for things that take away funding from programs like that. So one of the kind of pieces, I guess, that is important in my candidacy is to make sure that people, you know, that work in things like that, and that, you know, parents that care about issues like that actually have a voice in the State House. I've always, as I said earlier, always wore my heart on my sleeve, and I was proud to work with the Disabilities Policy Consortium in the State House in 2005 when they tried to make the State House more accessible. Imagine you're telling people, well, you need to come up and advocate for your own rights, and folks with disabilities, and it can't be a one-size-fits-all. As you know, people with disabilities are on a wide spectrum. It's a wide range of different disabilities that they face. Well, if the State House itself is not accessible to people, then how the hell are they going to fight for themselves? How the hell are we going to advocate for those issues? So it's important that the senator from this district, and I wish all 40 senators would have that same mentality to give people a voice that need a voice. And I'll certainly look into that, and I ask you to send us both an email. I think Ted and I have always, you know, been proponents of making sure that we fully fund programs like that.
Are there any other questions? Yes?
So I'm interested, you both are in favor of affordable housing, but you don't seem to be connecting the dots. So expanding MBTA service, for instance, is another thing that goes along with that. One of the reasons that we don't get more MBTA service, that we don't get more real affordable housing, is that people don't want it. Like, the reason that we have exclusionary zoning practices that keep houses on large minimum lot sizes and prohibit multifamily dwellings is because people in these towns don't want it. Why don't they want it? Well, a lot of it's classism, and frankly, a lot of it's racism. And so I'd be interested to hear if you have any thoughts on how we would go about starting to change that in our communities so that people would, you know, be a little more understanding of the fact that we can't just keep our communities rich and white forever.
I think the way you phrase it is correct, and the fact that there's a lot of people that don't want it for a variety of different reasons, and we can't allow that. And I think folks like yourself that come to a forum like this and make that an issue, and that, you know, hopefully we have a senator that uses that bully pulpit in our communities to say, look, this is, you know, this is a positive for our communities. We want to make sure that we're enriching people's lives regardless of race, class, economic situation. It's important that we do that, and that we use the bully pulpit to do that, and that we shape public opinion, and that we organize. I've been in many situations where some of my mentors have organized around the foreclosure of homes, right? I mean, I come from a family who's had that situation. They've faced that situation. It's a complete nightmare to have to pick up, move school systems, move communities because of predatory lending and banks, and unfortunately, you know, folks that are in a lot better position than the families they're going after, you know, make the decision to relocate them, to force them out of their homes. So it's important we organize around those issues. I agree, 40B, I think the colloquial term for it at the time was anti-snob zoning, right? You know, that means something. That means something. We have to embrace people in our communities, wherever they fall on the economic ladder. So I agree with you. I think we need to do more, and I think we need to organize around that.
I think that there's something to that, you know, on some level, people don't like change, so they don't want to see new developments in town. They don't want to see any kind of development that upsets what they feel is the character of their town or municipality that's been going on for years. And that's one of the reasons why I'm not for the elimination of 40B, but I'm for the tweaking of 40B, because again, I don't think that the developers who are coming in with affordable units are actually are upholding the mission that 40B was designed to do, which was to increase these populations in these different communities. And as Paul said, it was designed to be anti-snob zoning, so I think that's one of the reasons why I'm for tweaking it and not getting rid of it, because I do think that there's value, particularly when you can add diversity to a community. It's never a bad thing. Our communities always get stronger when we have a diverse population. So that's very important to me, and one of the reasons I'm in support of varying up the housing stock.
Nancy?
This kind of goes along with housing. This is a thorny issue. Foxborough has zero public transportation, zero. And of course, Mr. Kraft wants to put in a train line that will go through Walpole to Gillette Stadium. But that is very hard on the people of Walpole. I understand that. But I wish whether it was bus or train or something, I wish there was more public transportation or connection to public transportation. What I'm trying to say is there's no public transportation in Foxborough.
That's a great point. And I think that the proposal that's currently on the table for the Gillette Stadium pilot program is not a good proposal for a number of reasons. I don't think the numbers,
I don't argue with
right,
that.
the numbers don't add up for the ridership. I don't like the layover facility. The fact that it would just be express, it would bypass all these other communities without having any benefits. And there was no mitigation for Walpole to deal with safety issues at the grade
Right.
crossings for increased speed of trains. Number of problems. That said, there are other ways that we can get better on our public transportation. We have some very good RTAs in the area, regional transit authorities. The Greater Attleboro Transit Authority, or GATRA, serves the southern part of the Bristol and Norfolk district. Some of the district, I think, is served by the BAT bus, which is the Brockton Area Transit. We can be doing a lot more to invest in these in the RTAs as a way to achieve the goal of public transportation. Foxborough can affiliate with one of these RTAs to gain service. That's actually a town decision that has to be made on a town by town basis to affiliate. But once they do that, we need to at the state level increase cooperation and collaboration between the RTAs to provide a better network of public transportation than we currently have. Part of the problem that we're seeing, for example, in Sharon, where I'm from, we didn't. I think they didn't want to affiliate with an RTA because if they did, they would lose the ride, which seniors were depending on for their medical appointments to and from Boston. So it made the senior population says, please don't do that, because if we're disqualified from the ride, we can't get to our medical appointments. So we need to do a lot more in creating sort of zones of overlapping service where people can have public transportation without being covered. No, and that's a problem. It's because I'm betting a lot of people in Foxborough have their doctors in Boston and should be able to get to those doctors or Attleboro. So GATRA can accomplish the medical rides to Attleboro, but for people who are going to Boston, it's a real problem, and we need to figure out, we need to build a better mousetrap on this one.
Yeah, I agree with Ted and you, Nancy. We have to invest more in public transportation, I think, across the board. And I say that with the understanding that the MBTA is the most mismanaged operation in the history of the Commonwealth. They're a terrible organization who haven't kept their word and their commitment to the riders. They haven't kept their word and commitment to the communities that they serve, or the workers that work on those that work for the MBTA. It's completely mismanaged. However, We can't use that as an excuse not to invest in more programs. We need to, look, I come from the telephone sector, right? We talk about broadband being such a necessity now for people, that, dial-up internet has gone the way of the blacksmith, that really we need high-speed broadband. Well, it's the same thing in transportation infrastructure. It's a necessity. We can't just allow it to be used for a privileged few, right? I drive most of the time into Boston because my schedule just won't allow me to take the commuter rail a lot. But the fact that in Foxborough and in this part of the district, we don't have accessible public transportation for people to go into town, into Boston, whether it's for medical appointments or to work a job, I think is wrong. We need to invest in that. We need to look at more statewide investment in transportation. We need to make sure that, it's crazy to me that for years we've been talking about the north-south rail link and really creating a bridge through Boston, an economic development engine where people can go from the southern part of the Commonwealth right up into Maine. We need to be investing in that. There's shovel-ready jobs. We can put people to work, invest in public transportation so that people can get where they need to go, and then look at some of the rural communities out west, making sure that we're connecting from the western part of the state, from the New York border, through Worcester and into the eastern part of Massachusetts. Regionally, we need to do a better job to make sure that the ride is accessible. GATRA, as Ted said, that, all those RTAs we need to invest more in, but at the same time, I think we need to have comprehensive transportation reform around a single focus, that we need to increase access for people. Whether it's people going to jobs in Boston, whether it's the reverse commute, we want to make sure that we're investing in economic development here in Foxborough. Well, there's a reverse commute now. There's people that, young families, millennials especially, that live in and around Boston, that I'd love to see come to our community and work. But there's no way to get down here without sitting on 95, right, for hours at a time. So I think we need to do more. Again, the MBTA is completely mismanaged. The rollout, as Ted said, of this pilot program was atrocious. I'll be a senator that supports that transportation in principle to make sure that we are investing in economic development. We built Patriot Place for a reason here in Foxborough. We want people to come to work here in Foxborough. We want to give people an opportunity to drive, to take the train into Boston and not have to drive. But at the same time, we need to make sure that we're addressing mitigation. I've always been somebody who's fought for the people of our communities. Did it as a selectman, I'll do it as a senator, but we need to make sure that we do everything we can to mitigate the concerns of our neighborhoods, but at the same time invest in public transportation.
Okay, we've been at it for the better part of an hour and a half, so if there are last couple of questions, we'd be happy to entertain those. Yes,
It's not really
yeah.
a question as much as a statement, maybe this question here. From everything I'm hearing, and especially hit upon in the back row there, and I think this is just the overwhelming messaging of Democrats, that somehow it gets missed or is not cared about. And what's missing all my life when I have these arguments with my husband when I go, how can they be doing this? How can they be doing this? Usually about Republicans. And he goes, they have no empathy. And he's been saying that, and I've been like, that can't be right. They're human beings. And I argue with him, and then I finally reached the point where it's taking years of him being right, I guess, about that. And he's right. And I was in denial that humans can be like, the point you mentioned, like the white privilege, that no one wants their communities to change. That, they don't think about people with disabilities. You don't think about moving seniors. You don't think about the millennials. Everything is just mine, and it's but how do you bridge that gap? I mean, I feel like we're so disparate right now. We're so separate. I mean, I was with you when Ted was trying to get signatures, and the Republicans spewed vile hysteria at the three of you just standing there going, "Can I have a signature to get on the bill?" He's like, "Liberal." And I was like, "Here we get what is that?" Yeah, I try not to swear, but it almost came out. I just don't the empathy gap. I mean, this is a national issue more than I think a local issue. I think locally, when you talk to people one-on-one, a lot of times they have the same process. A lot of times they want the same things for their kids, for the seniors, for transportation. But then there's always like a wedge issue. There's always something that clicks in their head and turns it off. And messaging is important, and I think to keep the state blue, we got to keep going that way. And how can we're talking about one seat, but it's to your point, the Naughton's point. It's so important to keep it blue. If I may be so generalist as to now just call everything blue and red. And I don't know. I don't know what your thoughts are on how you reach out to people with perhaps a dearth.
Well, I mean,
empathy.
it is just one. It is just
That
one
was a-
seat. That's true.
it's
But
specific
it's
to
an
say,
important seat. I mean, it's the district is 160,000 people, and that's, the way that I have found in talking about the reasons, the values that I espouse as a Democrat, as a proud Democrat, is that you start by looking for common ground. That when you're talking to people, I think it may present as a lack of empathy, but I do think people care, and once you find that common ground, and once you figure out what some of the shared basic values are, you can build off of that in a conversation, and start to work with people about getting to their motivations and swinging them to your side. Because once you understand where people are coming from and what's driving them, what their motivation is, then you can drill down and and build upon that, build a relationship. You may not see eye to eye on everything, and that's perfectly fine. That's what makes us Americans, frankly. It's the way our system of government was designed. But I'm confident that if given the opportunity, that I can go in there and sit down with anybody, with any senator, with any representative, and find the common ground, and then build off of that, so that we can build legislation and reforms that make this a better Commonwealth and keep it number one in the nation.
Thank you. Empathy gap. That's an interesting way to put it.
I know it's a very divisive thing to say.
No, but
I'm
it's...
kind of contributing to the problem.
Look, no. Look, and those are the real conversations I think that we need to have in the Bristol-Norfolk district and across this country. I have been saying it. I heard this years ago, and I think it rings true, especially now, that people don't think about politics, they feel politics. Right? That there's been studies, there's been research that, they put people in a CAT scan and they see what parts of their brain lights up when they talk about issues that they care about, issues that they don't disagree with, and it's definitely not the thinking part of the brain, it's that emotional center of the brain, right? So when we have those conversations with people and we have those interactions with people, we need to understand that people feel like they're under attack, people feel like they've been left by the curbside, and it's not just Republicans or Democrats, I mean, it's across the spectrum, that people feel like folks aren't fighting for them anymore. That when they look at a legislature that goes in the first week of the session this year and gives themselves a pay raise, I'm a union guy. I think people should be making more money. But I think the symbol that sends in a year where we come in under projections, that the first thing they're going to do is devote time and energy to taking care of their own pay, I think that's a bad symbol to send. And I think when people see that, immediately the wall goes up. You talk about building a wall, it just isn't on the border. It's between people in our communities when we talk about these issues. But as Ted said, and Tip O'Neill always said that all politics is local, it's important to engage with people, to find that common ground, to make sure that we're coming together on things. I've had the pleasure, again, of being on a ballot a couple times, and certainly this is no exception. When I'm out talking to voters and knocking on doors, and you have that understanding that people feel politics, you get to know what makes them tick, what makes their families tick. As long as they feel like somebody's actually going to fight for them, that somebody's going to give them a voice, that we can disagree without being disagreeable, that we can actually have a primary between Ted and I and the Democratic Party without attacking each other, and when we can talk about values and issues and not be negative, that's the kind of trust that we need to build with voters. I saw a lot of my colleagues go and vote for President Trump for president, right? I didn't understand it because I don't come from that frame of reference. I could never vote for President Trump. But I understand that people did it because they're angry, because they're looking at a system that's left them behind, and they're saying, what can I do differently? And it's not to think about policies, it's not to think about the issues that we've discussed tonight. It's to say, you know what, forget about it, I'm done with everything. I'm done with that. We need to reconnect with those folks, and you do that by building credibility with them, by being honest, by fighting for them, and by standing for your values. And I think that's what you're going to see throughout this primary anyways, is a discussion about those policies, but at the same time, connecting with people that feel disenfranchised.
Thanks. I forgot I shouldn't have said that. This is going to be televised.
Sorry, we got it flipped out. Okay, well, thank you all for coming for this segment of tonight, which I'm beginning to think is going to be the only segment of tonight, given the hour. I hope I won't get much resistance from the elected members of the Democratic Town Committee who are here present. And I want to thank these two gentlemen for coming and spending the time with us, for answering the questions for us. It was great. Grassroots accessibility is what it's all about when it comes to letting people know who are going to represent you, and damn it, one of these two is going to represent us in this district, and we're all gonna work to see that happens. And we wish them both the best of luck between now and September 20th, that's the primary?
September 19th.
19th.
20th will be too late. Make sure you vote on the
Right.
19th.
I didn't say that. I didn't say that.
That's usually what the Republicans
Edit that out, Lauren.
20th is the unity breakfast, but on the 19th.
Okay, so, we're gonna call it a night, folks. Thanks very much.
Thank you.